It was just a Tuesday when Laura asked me for the last favor that would break my heart. I had been awake for hours, sitting in the kitchen, staring out the window as the sun rose, trying to swallow the weight of my decision. There was always something about mornings, a time to reflect on the past, to gather myself for the day ahead. But today my mind was filled with her words. "Mom, can you help me? Just this once. I need you to co-sign on this house." She said it so casually, as if it were just another favor, like when I'd babysat her kids or helped her move last month. I'd given her my entire life, my savings, my health. I'd worked overtime, gone without meals just to make sure she had what she needed. But somehow I didn't know how to say no. "Of course, darling. I'll do whatever I can to help," I had told her, my voice barely above a whisper, masking the exhaustion that clung to my bones. I had no idea then, no idea how much of me I was about to give away, how much of myself I would lose in that one simple decision. Laura had always been my dreamer, the one with the plans, the one who wanted a life bigger than the one I could give her. I'd worked hard all my life, but it never seemed to be enough for her. She wanted more, and I wanted to give it to her. But now I saw something shifting in me, something I hadn't expected. I was beginning to disappear. It had been a lifetime of selflessness. I worked 2 jobs when she was small. I gave up every inch of myself for her and her brother. And for years I believed it was worth it. The smiles, the laughter, the sweet words they would whisper when they thought I wasn't listening. But as they grew older, as they became successful, as they created their own lives, I started to feel more like a shadow, fading away, pushed to the background, my sacrifices no longer even acknowledged. This latest request from Laura was just another reminder. She needed me, yes, but in a way that kept her in control, in the driver's seat. I had my doubts, of course, but I shut them out. She had her reasons. She always had a reason. And who was I to question that? So, that afternoon I found myself on a train to the city. I had no idea how long the trip would take. I didn't mind. There was something calming about being alone with my thoughts, the gentle rocking of the carriage lulling me into a state of quiet resignation. I packed a small bag, just enough for the overnight stay, though I wasn't sure I'd need anything. I didn't tell anyone. It wasn't necessary. It was just a favor. I'd be back in the morning, I thought. Back to my little life. Back to the routine. By the time I arrived at the bank, it was late. The office felt cold, sterile, and impersonal. I had been here before years ago to sign some papers with my husband. But this time there was no James beside me. There was only me. Only the faint scent of cheap air freshener and the hum of a fluorescent light overhead. The woman at the desk smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She handed me the papers, but I barely glanced at them. I trusted Laura. I'd always trusted her. I didn't need to ask questions. She wouldn't have asked me to do this if it weren't necessary. I signed the papers, one after another, without hesitation, and handed them back. It was just another thing I had to do for her. Another sacrifice to make. The woman smiled again, this time more warmly, and handed me a pen to sign the final document. "Are you sure you're okay with this, Mrs. Greenwood?" she asked. I looked at her, confused. Sure, I was fine. Course I was fine. It was for Laura. I smiled back, trying to reassure her. But there was something in the back of my mind that whispered doubts. Doubts I didn't want to face. "Yes, I'm fine," I answered, my voice softer than I intended. I could feel the weight of those words, though. I had given up everything. My time, my health, my savings, my future. All in the name of family. But for what? To be left behind. To be forgotten. I walked out of the bank, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. I didn't know how long I had been walking before I found myself sitting in a small cafe, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. I stared at the rain falling outside, watching as the droplets clung to the window like tears I could no longer shed. Somewhere deep down I knew what this was. It wasn't just about the house. It was about me. About everything I had done for them. About everything I had lost along the way. I couldn't help but think about my life, about the years that had slipped through my fingers like sand. And in the silence of that cafe, I wondered, Was I just a tool to be used? A stepping stone on their path to a better life? Had they ever truly seen me? Or was I just a mother who could be relied upon, never questioned, never thanked? I felt a pang of guilt for these thoughts. I loved my children, I always had. But as I sat there, alone with my cold coffee, I wondered when I had stopped being a person to them and become just a resource. It was a thought I couldn't shake. When I returned home the next evening, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. I looked around at the familiar walls, the photos of my children on the mantel, and realized I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror, the woman who had spent so many years giving everything to her children, losing herself in the process. And just like that, it hit me, I had become invisible. For all my sacrifices, for all the love I had given, they no longer saw me. They didn't need me anymore. They had their lives, their homes, their dreams. And I had nothing. I sat at the kitchen table, the familiar pie dish in front of me, untouched. The room felt colder now, quieter. The house, once filled with the sounds of children, now felt like a tomb. I looked out the window at the darkening sky and whispered to myself, maybe it's time to stop giving. But deep down I knew it wasn't just that. It was time to stop losing myself. And as the silence enveloped me, I began to wonder what would happen if I took back just a little bit of what I had given. I hadn't realized how much time had passed since I last heard from Laura. Days, weeks, maybe even months, and still not a word. It wasn't the first time, of course. The busy schedules, the demands of life, I understood that. But this time something felt different. The silence wasn't just a break in communication. It was a fracture, a growing distance between us that I couldn't quite grasp. I tried calling her twice last week. No answer. So I left a message. A simple one, just like always. Hi Laura, it's Mom. Just wanted to check in, see how you're doing. I was thinking about you. Hope everything's well. Call me when you have a moment. Love you. I listened to the beep after I ended the message, my fingers still clutching the phone. When was the last time I actually heard her voice? Really heard it. Not just the quick, "Hi, Mom," before the line dropped because she had something else to do. When the days stretched into a week and the phone stayed silent, I tried again, this time with a different approach. Maybe I'd try something more personal, a note maybe. A handwritten card, something to remind her of when she was younger, of the times we used to share. She used to love when I'd send little surprises in the mail. I sat at my kitchen table, watching the autumn leaves drift past my window. The idea of sitting in silence in this old house was nothing new. It was part of the life I'd built after the kids had grown up. But the silence between Laura and me was growing louder. Every day that passed, I could hear it more clearly. I wrote her the letter. Dear Laura, I hope you're doing well. I was thinking about how we used to spend so much time together, how we'd plan your birthday parties, how I'd make sure everything was just right. I miss those days, sweetheart. You know you're always welcome to come home anytime. Love you. Always. I mailed it, expecting that it would be the start of something, that it would bring us back to the bond we once had. But a week went by, and there was no reply. Nothing. Not even a thank you. Then came the text. From Purston, of all people. Hi, Mrs. Greenwood. Just wanted to let you know that we've got everything handled for the kid's birthday. You don't need to worry about anything this time. We've got it all taken care of. Hope you're well. I blinked at the message, unsure whether I should laugh or cry. It was strange, almost mechanical. Purston, the man who used to barely glance my way at family gatherings, now suddenly took the lead. As if he were somehow in charge of what happened to me. I wanted to scream at the phone, to tell him that I had spent my life giving everything for this family. I had raised Laura. I had taught her to care. I had been the one there through everything. But instead, I swallowed the words and closed the phone. I decided to call Laura again the next day. Had to try. This time I had a plan. I was going to offer my help. I was going to ask about the upcoming family gathering, the one where I would normally bring the pie, the one where I was usually expected to show up, the kind of dinner that would normally make me feel part of something. But that invitation never came. I had heard nothing. I dialed her number, my hands trembling slightly as the call rang through. Hello. It was Laura's voice, but something about it sounded distant, like I was speaking to a stranger. Laura, hi, it's Mom. I just wanted to see how you're doing. Are you getting ready for the birthday party? I said, my voice as light as I could make it, hiding the ache that had formed in my chest. There was a long pause on the other end. Oh yeah, she replied. We've got everything planned. But listen, I was thinking, maybe you shouldn't come by this time. I know it's kind of last minute, but we've already got it all covered. And, you're always so busy, and I didn't want you to feel like you had to help this time. Her words hung in the air like an accusation, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I sat in silence for a moment, letting the heaviness of her refusal sink in. This wasn't just a change of plans. This was a sign, a clear indication that I no longer held a place in their lives the way I once did. Oh, I understand, sweetheart, I finally said, my voice quiet, barely above a whisper. I just wanted to help. But I understand. The line went dead. No goodbye. No promise to keep in touch. Just silence. A few days later, I received a message from Laura, an invitation, or rather an afterthought. She mentioned that they'd be celebrating the kid's birthday at their place, but there was no mention of me, no request for my presence. I wasn't even invited in the usual way like I used to be. The truth was unmistakable now. They didn't want me there. They had their lives. They didn't need me anymore. I tried to call her again, but this time my call went straight to voicemail. That was it. That was the last straw. I stood in the middle of my living room, the room that had once been full of laughter and noise, the room where I had spent so many hours preparing meals, wiping away tears, making sure everything was just right for my family. And now it felt empty, not just of people but of meaning. I had given everything for them. But what had I received in return? Nothing but silence. And just like that, I knew it was over. The family I had poured my heart into had moved on, and I was no longer a part of it. The air felt heavier than usual as I drove toward Laura's house. I had spent the morning preparing for this moment, carefully wrapping a small gift for my grandchild, picking out a simple yet pretty blouse, the one I knew she liked. I wanted to show up looking just right, as though nothing had changed. I told myself that this might be the moment I needed to repair the distance that had slowly grown between us. For weeks, I had been planning my visit. I had worked hard, of course. Still cleaning, still cooking, still trying to be the mother they all remembered. I imagined the look on Laura's face when I arrived with my gift, the excitement in her eyes, the warmth of her embrace. I still carried the hope that if I tried hard enough, if I showed up with all my love, everything would be fine. But as I drove closer, something began to stir in me, a quiet, gnawing feeling like a cold draft creeping in. Pushed it down. It was just nerves. It was the uncertainty of seeing them all again. Maybe I was imagining things. I turned onto their street, and my heart began to pound. The house was already full of cars, sleek sedans, polished SUVs. They had always been a bit more flashy than I was used to, but now it felt like something I couldn't keep up with. I parked and sat in the car for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to convince myself that it was all just in my head, that maybe this time things would be different. I walked up to the door, my steps slow, deliberate. As I reached for the doorknob, the door swung open. It wasn't Laura who greeted me first. It was a stranger, a tall man in a suit. "Hello," he said, his voice too warm but his eyes cold. "Can I help you?" I blinked, unsure how to respond. "Yes, I'm here to see Laura. It's me, Elizabeth, her mother." I smiled, hoping it would break the ice. His expression barely shifted. "Ah, Mrs. Greenwood, right. Well, Laura is inside, but I'm afraid we're a bit crowded in there. Perhaps it's not a good time." A lump formed in my throat, but I swallowed it. The words I wanted to say died on my lips. He didn't say anything else, and that silence, the space between us, was enough to tell me I wasn't welcome. And yet I walked in because I had no other choice. Inside, the house was a blur of unfamiliar faces. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the chattering in the background. It felt like I had stepped into a different world, one where I no longer belonged. The walls, once filled with the warmth of my family, now felt like a stage set, cold and calculated, a show I was no longer part of. I spotted Laura across the room, laughing with some guests, her back turned to me. She didn't notice me at first, so I stood by the door, waiting. I wanted to say something, anything, to break through the noise and reconnect with her. When she finally turned and saw me, her smile faltered, just for a second. "Mom," she said, her voice colder than I had remembered. "You made it. I didn't expect you to come." I felt the sting of her words, but I smiled anyway, the smile that I had worn so many times to hide my hurt. "I brought something for the kids," I said, holding out the gift. "I thought I'd come and help." She took the gift from my hands, her fingers brushing mine for just a moment. It was the briefest of contacts, but it felt like the longest distance between us. "Thanks, but we're fine. You really didn't need to come all the way out here for this. It's a little much, don't you think?" Laura's voice wasn't cruel, but it wasn't warm either. She wasn't angry. She wasn't anything. She was just indifferent. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as her words rang in my ears. Indifferent. That's what I had become to her. The realization hit me with a force I wasn't ready for. As she handed the gift off to someone else, I noticed something that stung worse than any words could. She didn't ask me to stay. She didn't ask if I wanted to sit down, or if I wanted to spend time with my grandchildren. She just turned away and resumed her conversation, as if I wasn't even there. My chest tightened, but I didn't show it. Couldn't. As I stood there, watching her move through the crowd, I felt the truth creeping in, slow and unbearable. I was nothing but a shadow to her now. Memory. Duty. Not a person. And then, before I could even process the weight of what was happening, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned, startled, and found myself face to face with one of the security guards. "Ma'am, I'm afraid you'll have to leave," he said, his tone polite but firm. For a moment I couldn't move. My legs felt heavy, as though the ground had suddenly become too solid to walk on. But then, slowly, I nodded, turning to leave. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say. I stepped outside into the cold, the sounds of the party muffled behind me. I took a deep breath and looked up at the darkening sky. The stars were out, but they offered no comfort. I didn't cry. Not then. I simply stood there, as if waiting for something to change, but knowing deep down that nothing would. I didn't go to bed that night. I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, my hands steady as I sifted through the papers. The weight of the humiliation from earlier in the evening hadn't faded, but something else had taken its place. A cold, hard resolve. There were no tears this time. No desperate need for an apology. There was only the need for action. The gift I had brought for Laura now sat, untouched, on the kitchen table. The warm greeting I had hoped for, the reconciliation I had imagined, had evaporated. I could feel the echoes of their laughter from the party still ringing in my ears, even now that the house was quiet again. It wasn't just that they had pushed me out of their lives, they had publicly displayed their disregard for me. But now I realized I had something they didn't expect. Something far more valuable than any apology or emotional outburst. Control. The mortgage. I had signed as a co-signer. I had trusted Laura. I had believed in her potential. I had believed in family. But now I was the one who had the power to alter the course of their lives. I reached for my phone and made the call. My lawyer Monica was always professional, always methodical. This wasn't a case of emotion. This was a case of numbers, of contracts, of obligations. Monica answered on the first ring, and I immediately started explaining the situation. "I need you to look over the mortgage contract for me, Monica. I need to know if there's any way out of this. I need to know if I have legal grounds to stop being part of this agreement." There was a long pause before she responded. "Elizabeth, are you sure about this? I've seen you sacrifice so much already. You've always done everything for them. Are you really ready to walk away from that?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the papers in front of me, my eyes scanning the fine print, looking for the out I needed. "I'm sure," I finally said. I've already walked away. But I'm not walking away without consequences. Monica sighed, the sound of a chair creaking as she adjusted her position. All right, let me take a look. Give me a few hours. I'll call you back. As I sat in silence, I let the weight of my next steps settle into my bones. This wasn't about revenge. At least not in the way people might think. This was about power, control, regaining something that I had willingly surrendered over the years. This was about teaching them a lesson they would never forget. 3 hours later, Monica called back. Her voice was calm, methodical as usual. Elizabeth, you've been co-signer on the mortgage for over a year, and from what I see, you have a legal option here. If you can demonstrate that the relationship with the primary borrowers, in this case Laura and her husband, has deteriorated to the point where they can't uphold their financial commitments, you have the right to request immediate repayment of the loan balance. The bank can be notified of your change in circumstances. It may trigger an acceleration clause. I let her words sink in, understanding the implications. You mean I can force them to pay the whole balance? Now? Yes, that's the legal leverage you have. The bank will need to take your complaint seriously. But you'll have to act fast. This could cause their mortgage to become due in full. I didn't hesitate. Do it. Elizabeth, this is big. Are you really ready to go through with it? Monica asked, a hint of concern in her voice. I'm ready, I said firmly. I had made my decision. They had taken from me, from my life, from my heart, from my soul. Now it was my turn. I would make them understand what it meant to lose everything. The next morning I arrived at the bank. I had all the necessary documents with me, the power of attorney I had once given them, and now the power to revoke it. The bank representative, a young woman with a polite smile, greeted me. Good morning, Mrs. Greenwood. How can I assist you today? I handed her the paperwork Monica had prepared, a list of changes to the mortgage status, and a formal letter notifying them of the new developments in the situation. I'm here to inform you that I am no longer willing to co-sign on this mortgage. I am invoking the acceleration clause. The full balance of the loan should be paid immediately, I said, my voice calm but cold. She raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. I'm sorry, Mrs. Greenwood. Are you sure about this? The acceleration clause could have serious consequences for the borrowers. I'm well aware, I replied. That's the point. I'm sure. I could see her hesitation as she took the papers, clearly unsure of how to proceed. I'll need to process this and get back to you with the next steps. It may take a few days. I understand, I said. But I expect a response soon. Very soon. As I left the bank, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but it wasn't the kind of lightness I'd hoped for. No, this wasn't relief. This was power. This was control. I had set things in motion, and now there was no turning back. In the days that followed, I thought about the consequences, about how Laura and Preston would react. I wondered if they would even understand what I had done. But as I sat in my quiet house, watching the seasons change outside my window, I realized something important. I had reclaimed my dignity. I had taken the reins of my life back, in a way that only I could. It wasn't about ruining them. It was about making them see what it felt like to be discarded, to be taken for granted, to be cast aside as easily as they had cast me out of their lives. I wasn't asking for forgiveness anymore. I wasn't waiting for them to come around. I was doing this for myself, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. The day after my call to Monica, everything felt different. There was a strange calmness that settled over me, as if the storm that had been brewing for so long had finally reached its peak. But it wasn't over. It was just beginning. I stood in the quiet of my living room, surrounded by the same walls that had seen so many sacrifices, so much heartache. The place where I had always given, always provided, always been the one to hold everything together. But not anymore. Today I was doing something for me. Today I was the one in control. I sat at the kitchen table, looking over the papers one last time. The letter, the bank forms, the contract that had held my family's future in its grip. And now it was my weapon. The weapon that would shift the balance of power. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't about anger. It was about clarity. It was about strength. Picked up the phone. The line clicked once, and then I was listening to the hold music. The call was routine at first. The customer service representative asked for my name and account details. I provided them, my voice steady, controlled. It wasn't the first time I dealt with the bank. After all, I had been co-signer on the mortgage for years. But this time I wasn't here to ask for help. I wasn't here to make excuses. After a few minutes, the representative came back on the line. "How can I assist you today, Mrs. Greenwood?" she asked politely. "I'd like to speak with someone from the risk management department," I said, my voice calm and unwavering. "It's about the mortgage I co-signed for my daughter and her husband." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then the transfer. Moments later, a woman's voice greeted me. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Greenwood. I understand you have concerns regarding the mortgage. How can I assist you today?" "I'm not concerned," I said, my voice level. "I am formally withdrawing my guarantee as co-signer on the mortgage loan for Laura Greenwood and her husband Preston. I need to activate the acceleration clause." The woman's tone shifted just slightly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Greenwood. Could you please explain what you mean by that?" "I'm invoking the clause in the mortgage agreement that makes the loan due in full," I explained. "I am no longer able to assume responsibility for the loan due to the breakdown of the familial relationship. I no longer feel I can support the borrowers, as the situation has changed drastically." She hesitated. "I understand, Mrs. Greenwood. But, just to confirm, you are aware that this means the entire outstanding balance of the loan would become immediately due?" "Yes," I replied, my tone not wavering. "I am fully aware of the consequences." There was another pause, but this time it was filled with a quiet, almost imperceptible sense of disbelief. The woman was processing the gravity of what I had just requested. "I will need to process this, Mrs. Greenwood," she said carefully. "It may take a few days for the request to be formalized and for you to receive a confirmation. However, I'll make sure the appropriate steps are taken immediately." "Thank you," I said, and hung up without another word. The silence in the house was almost too much to bear, but I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I simply sat, letting the finality of my decision sink in. I knew what was coming. I knew the shock that would hit them. But I also knew the truth. This was the only way to make them see. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger. It was about ensuring that they understood the cost of taking me for granted. They had pushed me away, treated me as nothing more than a tool, a means to their own ends. Now it was my turn to take back control. The next few days passed in a haze of cold determination. I didn't hear from Laura or Preston, and that in itself was telling. They didn't know yet. They didn't realize the storm I had just unleashed. Then the letter came. It was addressed to Laura and Preston. My hands didn't tremble when I saw it. They had no reason to. I had already made my peace with what I had done. I opened it slowly, the paper feeling heavier with each word. The letter from the bank was official. It informed Laura and Preston that the mortgage was now due in full, immediately. The account had been triggered under the acceleration clause due to the change in co-signer status. I knew what would happen next. Their lives, their carefully built world, would begin to unravel. They had no way of paying off the loan. Their dream house, their new life, it would all come crashing down. And there was nothing they could do to stop it. I imagined the phone call they would make to the bank. I imagined the panic in their voices when they realized what had just happened. I imagined their shock, their disbelief. But none of that mattered anymore. They had pushed me to this point. They had left me with no choice. And as I sat there, the letter resting on the table in front of me, I felt a strange sense of calm. The power had shifted. The balance had changed. I was no longer the one who was at the mercy of their decisions. I was the one who had made the decision. They would never understand the sacrifices I made for them. They would never know how much it hurt to be discarded like this. But they would remember this moment. They would remember that I had taken back my dignity, not with anger, not with tears, but with cold, calculated precision. And as I sat there, the evening light fading outside, I finally felt at peace. It was done. I had won. It was an ordinary morning when the letter arrived. I had no idea it was coming, but I suppose I should have expected it. The timing was impeccable. Everything was falling into place, and I couldn't help but feel a strange calm as I opened the envelope. The bank's official notice sat in my hands. The language was dry, legal, but its meaning hit with a force I couldn't ignore. Due to the recent breach in conditions set forth in the mortgage agreement, and the sudden withdrawal of co-signature, the total outstanding balance of the loan is now due in full. Immediate repayment is required, or foreclosure proceedings will commence within the next 30 days. I sat there for a moment, the weight of the words settling into my chest. I wasn't surprised. I had known this moment would come. They had no way to pay. They had gambled with everything, thinking they could live outside the boundaries of responsibility. But now the walls were closing in and there was no escape. The phone rang soon after, and it didn't take me long to recognize the number. Laura's voice came through the line, shaky, desperate. "Mom," she started, her voice cracking as she tried to steady herself. "We got the letter. From the bank. They're saying we have to pay everything now. They're threatening to take the house. You've got to help us, please." I didn't interrupt her. I listened, feeling the cold distance growing between us. This was the moment. This was the culmination of everything I had warned them about, everything I had given, and now they were at my mercy. Her words tumbled out, pleading, almost frantic. "We didn't mean for you to feel like this, Mom. We never wanted you to feel hurt. I'm sorry for what happened at the party. We were just caught up. We didn't think it would come to this." I sat back, the silence stretching between us. I could hear the sound of her breathing on the other end, and I realized as I listened that I wasn't going to offer her the comfort she expected. I wasn't going to soothe her or tell her everything would be okay. I had nothing to say that would change anything. "Laura," I said softly but firmly, my voice steady. "I can't help you." I heard her gasp. There was a long pause, and for the first time, I realized she wasn't just hearing the words. She was processing them. She was understanding what they meant. "Please, Mom. We'll fix it. We'll sell the house, but we need your help. We just need time." Time for what? To rebuild a life they had stolen from me. To pretend that everything could be patched up with a few words and some empty promises. "No," I said again, my voice unwavering. "You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. I'm not going to be your safety net anymore." There was no anger, no venom in my voice, just an empty, quiet resolve. I could hear the frustration, the panic building in Laura's voice, but I didn't allow myself to feel anything but what I knew was right. "You were never really there for me, Laura. You've taken everything I gave you, and you didn't even look back. I was never anything more than a tool for you to use," I continued, the words coming out more clearly now. "I've done enough. It's time you learned that some things can't be fixed with money or favors." The line went silent. I could almost see her there, holding the phone in trembling hands, waiting for me to say something else, to back down. But I didn't. I wouldn't. "Well, I guess we're on our own now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You always were," I said, and hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time afterward, but there was no pain, no satisfaction, just an overwhelming sense of nothing. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was simply done. The days that followed were filled with a chaotic silence. The house that had once been full of laughter, full of life, was now just a hollow shell of what it had been. I watched from the sidelines as Laura and Preston scrambled, trying to sell their house, trying to salvage what was left of their dreams. But nothing worked. Their social status, their attempts to spin the narrative, it all collapsed. They couldn't sell their home for the price they needed. Their debt was too large, their reputation too tarnished. The buyers saw them for what they were, people who had built their lives on deceit. I heard about it all, but I didn't respond. I didn't reach out. They had already lost me. They had lost everything. I, on the other hand, returned to my life. My quiet, simple life. The one I had long neglected while I gave everything to them. My little house. My solitude. My freedom. I didn't have to think about the past anymore. I didn't have to beg for their love or approval. I didn't have to sacrifice my soul for a family that had never truly valued me. As I sat on my porch, sipping my tea, watching the world go by, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't the peace I had imagined when I first became a mother. It wasn't the peace of being surrounded by a loving family. But it was something far more important. It was the peace of knowing who I was, of knowing that I had finally taken control of my life. And for the first time in years I felt free.